It's me, Mario!
The Nintendo 64 is considered one of the best video game consoles of all time. There are a lot of people who grew up with the system having fun memories playing some of the system's strongest games. Now, I never actually grew up with the Nintendo 64, I actually grew up with the Wii, but I did get the system as a hand-me-down from my uncle a few years ago along with Super Mario 64. I also got a few more games later on from eBay like Banjo-Kazooie and Super Smash Bros. And I got GoldenEye as another hand-me-down from my uncle. And after playing through some of the system's best games, it's obvious why the system is loved. These games are super good, especially Super Mario 64, which was a launch title for the system in 1996 or 1997 for Europe. But here's a little info about the games themselves. Super Mario 64 is an awesome 3D platformer that has Mario traversing Peach's castle and other levels to collect power stars to save her from Bowser. Banjo-Kazooie is also a really good 3D platformer that is just as much fun as Mario 64, with funny writing, cool new moves, interesting worlds, and fun collectibles. Super Smash Bros. Is the start of an incredible fighting series that just kept on getting bigger and better with every new game. GoldenEye is also a really fun multiplayer choice if you're not into Smash Bros. Now you might be wondering, where's The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time? Where's Mario Kart 64? I'm aware that I don't own any of the Zelda games, but it's because I've been distracted playing Breath of the Wild and other games that I probably forgot. I don't know if I'll go back and buy it eventually, but I'll just wait and see. But in the meantime, I kinda just want to enjoy the games that I have first. Moving off the topic of games, let's go over the controller because this is an odd controller. You have your standard A and B buttons, L and R buttons, and a D-pad, which I don't know if it was used in any game on the system. Let me know in the comments if the D-pad was used in any Nintendo 64 game. But the new additions are the 3 handles, the Z button on the back of the controller, and the 360-degree analog stick. There's even a slot on the back of the controller for the rumble pack, which is an accessory you put into the controller slot to allow it to rumble at certain instances in games. This isn't a controller I like to use. It's really hard to adjust to this controller for me, and the analog stick isn't good either. But it isn't the worst controller I've used. It didn't affect the amount of enjoyment I had in Mario 64, but it isn't a controller I recommend Nintendo brings back to later systems like the GameCube controller. But I mean, at least it came in a lot of cool colors. At the end of the day, I'd say that the Nintendo 64 is still a fun system to go back to and play, whether single player wise or multiplayer wise, despite its age. It has some of the best games to play on it, and even though the system has a few flaws, it's still a great system in the end. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, hopefully it makes you want to replay your Nintendo 64 again. This is something I kinda want to do again with other Nintendo consoles in the future, so stay tuned for that. But thanks for watching and have a good day. I played on original Nintendo 64 hardware in late 2021. I did it. Recently, I talked about Super Mario 64 for the game's 25th anniversary back in September. But the difference was, I wasn't playing Super Mario 64 on the original Nintendo 64, I was playing it in Super Mario 3D All-Stars. But recently, I got around to playing on the original Nintendo 64. In late 2021. Yeah, who needs the Xbox Series X or the PlayStation 5? I have something much more. Embarrassment. The Nintendo 64, when I first talked about it in April of 2020, I never really talked about the system's shortcomings. I talked about the games that I had, which were good. I talked about its crazy controller, or as some people call it, the controller for people with 3 hands. But while I think the Nintendo 64 may be a bit obsolete to return to nowadays with its library, being on the Wii U Virtual Console and the Switch Online expansion pack, yet this is coming from the same person who just said he played on original Nintendo 64 hardware in late 2021. It's been a long year, but those both have their own problem. The emulation on the Wii U is garbage, the brightness is not ideal, and the games just don't look that good to be honest. And on Switch, while the emulation is a problem according to a lot of people, you also have to pay. What is wrong with this company? And even though playing on original hardware definitely feels like the most natural way to play, that's not to say it doesn't have problems of its own. If you have a lot of dust, then cartridges won't work, much like all other retro games. The way the games look, especially on an HD TV, is ugly with the fuzzy picture quality and just not really being fun to look at, which I guess is understandable from a 25-year-old game console. And then there's the console itself. It's fine, I suppose. It's pretty weird looking for a system from the 90s, compared to the sleek and eye-catching design of the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo many years earlier. The Nintendo 64 definitely doesn't look good. It's not bad, but it just makes me uncomfortable. but despite the oddities of the system's weird design, I do kind of have to say it's pretty iconic. I feel like even though it has a weird look, it's kind of engraved in your head. Even if the Nintendo 64 label wasn't there, you'd immediately tell, hey, it's the Nintendo 64, the system that got embarrassingly beaten by the Sony PlayStation. And then we move on to the controller, which also isn't really my favorite. My opinions over time has become more forgiving of it as my hands got used to its design. But man, this is just not a good controller. The way you hold it is exactly how you would hold a regular controller, but it just feels kinda awkward for my liking. Especially when you have to stretch your thumb all the way to the analog stick, and it's just not good. The buttons, even though they're not as satisfying to press as the other Nintendo controller buttons, they're serviceable. And as for the analog stick, I get it, the 64's 360-degree analog stick was very revolutionary at the time, but nowadays this thing is a piece of It's hard plastic, so it already doesn't feel good to use, but what makes it even worse is the fact that it wears out and loosens way too quickly. I'd still use it because Mario 64 feels like it was designed entirely around the controller, which it was, what with all of its buttons and everything, but I still don't like this controller that much. And remember those 4 directional buttons on the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons? Well, they got their start here, and they're okay. I think their placement is a bit unusual, especially considering we have a D-pad here that doesn't really serve much of a purpose. The Nintendo 64 games that I own, at least from what I know, doesn't support the D-pad, which kinda defeats the purpose of even having a D-pad. The Rumble Pack slot is on the back, which basically is an expansion you can get for the controller to make it vibrate at certain points in games like StarFox 64 to give off more immersion. I guess. For as immersive as you can make a game from 1997 get. So the Nintendo 64, overall good system, having fun with it and its games 25 years later, though the way the system's games look and how a good majority kinda struggle with their age a bit, and its controller kinda showing a little bit of its age nowadays as well, definitely shows it isn't flawless, but I'll always return to the system every now and then. It's still a magical time, and even though a lot of its game library hasn't aged very well, I still really enjoy it. Glad that's over with. Talked about the same thing twice, played on a 25-year-old game console in late 2021. What better way to go from here? Perhaps maybe finding the courage to pay $50 a year for the Switch Online Plus expansion pack? Not gonna happen.
And that's gonna wrap up today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please consider subscribing and checking out my other videos on the channel where you'll find more videos like this one. And again, thank you all so much for watching and see you next time.